There are different theories about the origin of Columbus. It is not that we think that he was born in Genoa, as most of the scientists and most of the historians think and support.
On May 12th, 2021, the world of history was rocked to its core. For years, scientists had been working to analyze the DNA of Christopher Columbus, and what they revealed about his origins left historians absolutely pale. We've all been told he was a Genoese weaver's son who changed the world, but that story just crumbled.
There are three different theories claiming that he's from Portugal. They have the relatives to compare. So if we could compare and find a match, this would end the problem. And if we compare and there is no match, it means that particular theory was not correct.
The analysis pointed to a secret heritage so dangerous for his time, he had to bury it completely. This isn't just about where he was from. It's about the incredible lengths he went to hide his true identity from the world. A code in the bones. His Y chromosome profile, inherited directly through the male line, didn't fit within the Genoese genetic clusters. To be clear, the genes of the man who supposedly hailed from Italy looked like they belonged somewhere else entirely. Instead, the sequences showed a much stronger connection to populations from the Western Mediterranean, specifically areas tied to Spain's Sephardic Jewish communities. These were families that had lived in Iberia for centuries, contributing massively to its culture and economy, until the infamous Alhambra Decree of 1492 forced them to convert, flee, or face the ultimate penalty. It was a brutal act of ethnic cleansing that saw over 100,000 people exiled. The genetic markers found in Columbus's remains, according to the stunning reports, were compatible with Sephardic Jewish ancestry. That phrase may sound clinical, but its meaning was a historical earthquake. It suggested that Columbus might not have been the devout Catholic Italian explorer celebrated in every history book. He could have been a converso, a Jew who had converted to Christianity simply to survive the horrors of the Spanish Inquisition. This was a wow moment for historians, not just because it rewrote his biography, but because it added an entirely new dimension to his mission, one that might have been rooted in desperation rather than divine destiny. The idea immediately triggered a storm of reactions. Supporters of the theory pointed out that the timing was almost too perfect to ignore. Columbus set sail on August 3, 1492, just days after the final deadline for Jews to leave Spain. The expulsion ships, crowded with heartbroken families carrying whatever they could, left the same ports from which Columbus launched his voyage to glory. What many overlooked is the sheer tragic poetry of that moment. Could it be that his journey to the New World had another meaning entirely? Perhaps it was a secret hope for refuge or redemption beyond the reach of the Inquisition. And the thing nobody tells you is, the connections don't stop there. Many of Columbus's earliest and most crucial backers were themselves conversos. His interpreter on the first voyage, Luis de Torres, was a converted Jew who spoke both Hebrew and Arabic. Columbus's personal physician was also from a family known to have Jewish roots. It was as if his entire inner circle was made up of people who had survived persecution by adopting new identities. What were once seen as coincidences suddenly looked like a pattern of deliberate choices, a network of survivors hiding in plain sight. This revelation was so powerful, it turned history on its head. But the story of how they found this secret is just as incredible. The man of 1,000 lies. Long before DNA testing was even a dream, the official story of Christopher Columbus was already falling apart at the seams. For more than 500 years, he has been painted in the broad strokes of legend, the brave navigator from Genoa, Italy, born to a humble wool weaver's family, a man of modest means who rose to global fame through sheer will. Yet beneath all the heroism lies a question that no one could ever answer with certainty. Who was he really? From the very beginning, sharp-eyed historians noted that something about his story never fully lined up. First, there was the language issue. Columbus spoke and wrote fluently in Spanish and Portuguese, but strangely, never in Italian. Not a single letter or journal entry in his supposed native tongue has ever been found. Even more bizarre, the Spanish he used was filled with archaic terms and idioms that were out of place for a man raised in Genoa. It was as if he learned the language from old books, not from daily conversation. These weren't small details. They were massive red flags pointing to a man who might not have been who he said he was. Then came the name game. The mystery only deepened when historians found that even his name wasn't consistent. He signed official letters as Cristobal Colon, but in other correspondence, he used Christopher Colombo and even bizarre cryptic signatures that resembled secret codes. These signatures were a puzzle in themselves, filled with crosses and strange abbreviations that, when decoded, seemed to conceal religious pleas rather than simply confirm his identity. He was a man building a paper trail designed to confuse, not clarify. What many overlooked was that this level of secrecy was not normal, even for the chaotic 15th century. For a man whose journeys were so well documented, his early years are a complete black hole. There are no first-hand accounts of his childhood, no clear records of his education, and no unambiguous proof linking him to the family in Genoa that supposedly bore his name. It is as if Columbus appeared in history, fully formed, stepping onto the stage of the Spanish court with maps, ambition, and a destiny already written, but with a past that was deliberately erased. Some scholars believe this wasn't an accident. During the time Columbus lived, Europe was a terrifying place for anyone of Jewish descent. The Spanish Inquisition was in full force, and people with converso ancestry often changed names, altered family records, and scrubbed their origins clean just to survive. If Columbus was among them, then secrecy wasn't a choice. It was a lifeline. Even his personal relationships reflected this pattern of extreme caution. His journals were written with a tone of self-censorship, as if he knew that one day someone might scrutinize every single word. When he appealed to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, he spoke with a curious mix of humility and authority, framing his mission as divinely inspired. It was as though he was always balancing two lives, the explorer he wanted the world to see, and the man he could never fully reveal. These clues piled up for centuries, turning his identity into one of history's greatest unsolved cases. And that's when science stepped in to hunt for the ghost in his genes. Science versus history. The turning point came when history met science. For centuries, scholars could only debate Columbus's origins with dusty letters and disputed documents. But in the late 20th century, a new frontier opened up: genetics. Suddenly, the secrets that had resisted 500 years of investigation might be hidden not in ink or parchment, but in bone dust. And deep beneath the marble floor of Seville Cathedral, in a vault labeled simply, "The Bones of the Admiral," those secrets waited. In the early 1990s, a brilliant Spanish geneticist named José Antonio Lorente began a project that sounded like science fiction, to extract DNA from the remains believed to belong to Columbus. The challenge was enormous. Not only were the bones centuries old, but they were also fragmented, brittle, and possibly mixed with others. To make things even more complicated, the remains had been moved multiple times across the Atlantic, between Spain and the Dominican Republic, creating a massive historical feud. Both countries claimed to have the true remains of the Admiral of the Ocean Sea. Lorente's mission was twofold. First, find out which claim was real, and second, see what those bones might reveal about the man himself. The project took decades. You see, working with ancient DNA is incredibly difficult. The samples were so delicate that contamination from a single misplaced fingerprint could ruin the entire result. For months on end, the lab remained sealed and sterile, with every tiny bone fragment logged, cataloged, and preserved under controlled temperatures that hovered just above freezing. Lorente and his team painstakingly compared DNA samples from the Seville remains with those of Columbus's known relatives, including his son Hernando and his brother Diego. Finally, a breakthrough came. The DNA extracted from the Seville remains matched that of Columbus's family line. The bones, Lorente confirmed, were genuine. Seville held the true resting place of the explorer. But that was just the beginning. Lorente wasn't just interested in where Columbus was buried. He wanted to know where he came from. As genetic sequencing technology advanced at lightning speed, Lorente and his team revisited the samples with fresh eyes and powerful new equipment. They analyzed mitochondrial DNA, inherited from the maternal line, and Y chromosome sequences from the paternal line. Then they began comparing that unique genetic profile against thousands of DNA markers from populations all across Europe. For years, the results were frustratingly inconclusive. The DNA was so degraded it was like trying to read a book with most of the pages ripped out. But Lorente's persistence paid off. As newer, AI-assisted methods allowed the researchers to reconstruct missing genetic segments, a shocking pattern began to emerge. The data didn't match what historians expected at all. Instead of clustering with Italian samples, Columbus's DNA showed a strong, undeniable affinity with populations from the Western Mediterranean, specifically from the Iberian Peninsula. And even more intriguingly, certain markers were extremely rare in Italy, but were common among families of Sephardic Jewish descent. The very same families exiled by the Spanish crown. The genetic signals were all pointing away from Genoa and toward a secret, persecuted past. The team knew they were sitting on a discovery that could rewrite history forever. A debate that shook the world. The aftermath of the DNA revelation was nothing short of academic chaos. What had begun as a quiet genetic study in a Spanish lab exploded into one of the most polarizing historical debates in decades. Universities, museums, and even governments scrambled to respond, each staking out a position on whether the man celebrated as the discoverer of the New World was, in fact, the product of a massive historical cover-up. News outlets across the globe ran with bold headlines, and the story went viral. The thing nobody tells you is how fiercely people will fight to protect the stories they've always been told. At the University of Granada, where José Antonio Lorente had led the study, reporters camped outside the biology department, hungry for more details. Yet, Lorente remained cautious, emphasizing that the data was strongly suggestive rather than definitive. That small distinction did little to calm the storm. Historians from Italy were the first to push back, and they pushed back hard. They cited notarized records from Genoa that mentioned a family named Colombo, as well as documents believed to reference Columbus's father. The explorer's Genoese origin is irrefutable, one prominent Italian academic declared. But critics quickly countered that these records only proved that a Colombo family existed in Genoa, not that the famous explorer was part of it. The man's own handwriting, language, and strange behavior still didn't add up. Meanwhile, geneticists not connected to the study began weighing in. Some warned that ancient DNA can be unreliable, especially from degraded samples. But many others defended Lorente's findings, pointing out that the specific pattern of Sephardic ancestry couldn't easily be dismissed as a random fluke. One researcher described the results as a missing puzzle piece that makes sense of everything historians couldn't explain. The debate grew even more intense when religious scholars joined the fray. They noted the profound irony that Columbus's voyage had been sanctioned by the same Spanish monarchy that was brutally persecuting and expelling Jews. If the findings were true, then Spain's most celebrated icon might have been a descendant of the very people the crown had condemned. There were also those who saw the revelation not as an attack on history, but as a long overdue correction. To them, Columbus's possible Jewish ancestry didn't diminish his achievements. It humanized them. They argued that perhaps his incredible courage to sail into the unknown came not just from ambition, but from the deeper instinct of a man who had spent his entire life concealing who he was. Academic conferences grew heated. Panels that once discussed maritime routes now turned into fiery debates about identity, persecution, and the politics of memory. A few scholars even called for history books to be immediately rewritten. Others insisted that the legend of Columbus should remain untouched, no matter what science said. The DNA discovery had shattered the illusion of certainty, proving history is never set in stone. It forces us to ask, what does this new truth mean for his legacy today? As the dust settled, the world found itself confronting an uncomfortable truth. History is not fixed. It bends, shifts, and changes when new evidence comes to light. The DNA results had pulled Christopher Columbus out of the mythic past, and placed him back into the fragile reality of human identity. For centuries, he was a symbol of empire and discovery. Now, he stood as something else entirely, a man caught between worlds, both in his life and in his legacy. Historians began to re-examine his letters with renewed scrutiny, and everything looked different. Phrases once dismissed as simple religious devotion took on new weight. His fascination with Old Testament prophecies, his cryptic references to redemption, and his peculiar coded signature all seemed to echo the hidden struggle of a man balancing faith with fear. If Columbus had indeed descended from a Sephardic Jewish line, his lifelong silence finally made sense. He lived in a world where the wrong ancestry could mean exile or worse. His voyage west may have been both an act of exploration and an act of escape, a desperate bid to carve out a future far from the brutal intolerance of the Old World. So, does this hidden history change how we should view Columbus today? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more secrets from the past.